Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for September 27th, 2023. Yesterday, I noted that it had been 1 year earlier that the pipelines built by Russia under the North Sea had been blown up by explosives. It was in February 8th, 2023, that Seymour Hersh published an article which accused the Biden administration of organizing to have Navy divers plant the explosives which blew up the pipelines. This assured that Russian gas would not be available for Germany. Now, Hersh wrote this article based on an intelligence source, and he said that it was not only authorized by Biden, but he backed it up with some quotes directly from Biden. That Biden warned on February 7th, 2022 in a press conference, quote, "If Russia invades Ukraine, there will no longer be a Nord Stream 2 pipeline. We will bring an end to it," unquote. That's what Biden said. Now, standing next to him at that press conference was German Chancellor Schultz, who dutifully responded, as one might expect of a leader whose nation had surrendered its sovereignty to the United States, quote, "We are acting together. We are absolutely united," unquote. Well, did Schultz know that Biden had planned to blow up the pipeline? Well, we don't know, because the Germans have refused to do any serious investigation. And meanwhile, the German economy is suffering mightily under the effects of a loss of Russian gas and the shutdown of nuclear power plants and the imposition of a green agenda. A combination of inflation and recession have hit Germany, and yet Schultz is sticking to his pledge to Biden that we will act together. Now, on the 1 year anniversary of the bombings, Hersh reiterated his allegation and provided a more serious or more thorough explanation of why it was done. And I'm going to read you a little bit from his article from 2 days ago. What he said is that the Nord Stream pipelines were destroyed not as an action against Russia, but against Germany. And here's what he said. The threat of destroying the pipelines was intended to deter Putin from moving into Ukraine. It was not only Biden who issued that threat, but Victoria Nuland. Now, the official, that the intelligence source that Hersh had talked to, said that the threat against Nord Stream was conceived as, quote, "an extraordinary deterrent against a Russian invasion of Ukraine because of the economic impact on Russia," unquote. Then he said that Putin did it, quote, "despite the threat," unquote. Now, the official told Hersh, quote, "The White House fear was that Putin would get Germany under his thumb." He went on to conclude, "The Biden administration blew up the pipelines, but the action had little to do with winning or stopping the war in Ukraine. It resulted from fears in the White House that Germany would waver and turn on the flow of Russian gas, and that Germany and then NATO, for economic reasons, would fall under the sway of Russia and its extensive and inexpensive natural resources. And thus followed the ultimate fear, that America would lose its long-standing primacy in Europe." So that was Hersh's explanation for why the U.S. blew up the pipelines. Now, I find no problem overall with Hersh's reporting as far as it goes, but it lacks a deeper historical context, which I'm going to provide. The fear that Hersh is identifying is that the supply of gas to Germany would lead to a tilt away from the United States and toward Russia. This is not a new fear. This reflects a historic British obsession going back to the time of the American Revolution, of a fear of a Russian-U.S. alliance, which would be an existential threat to the power of the British Empire. Let me give you a couple of examples of that. In 1780, during the American Revolutionary War, Catherine the Great, the Empress of Russia, announced support for the cause of the League of Armed Neutrality, This was an alliance to protect against Britain's Royal Naval policy of unlimited search of ships during the American Revolution. That is, the British were searching for contraband, weapons, and other goods going to the American colonies to aid them in the war against Britain. And the League of Armed Neutrality was a defensive trade by neutral countries against British intervention. Again, in 1863, during the height of the Civil War, Russian naval vessels were sent to New York and San Francisco by Tsar Alexander II to prevent a blockade of key U.S. ports by the Brits during the Civil War. The Brits were considering intervening on behalf of the South. Palmerston had already told Queen Victoria that the Civil War would be an opportunity to defeat the threat coming from America to the British Empire. And it was clear that the Russians acted once again to aid the United States at a point at which the British were threatening it. Now, after Lincoln's victory, the British Empire focused on preventing an alliance between Germany and Russia. And this was the implication of the presentation and paper delivered by Halford Mackinder in 1904 to the Royal Geographic Society, titled The Geographical Pivot of History, where he warns that the greatest threat to the British Empire would be a unity of economic alliance between Central Europe and the Eurasian heartland, and that the British must prevent that at all costs. And this became the policy. In fact, it was already the policy, but it became the explicit policy of British diplomacy from 1904 forward, including funding Japan to defeat Russia in the Russia-Japanese War of 1904-1905. It also had to do with the establishment of the Triple Entente of British, France, and Russia against Germany that was consolidated in 1907, and this led to World War I. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles included punishment of Germany and Russia, because Russia had already experienced the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. So there was an effort to prevent any alliance between Germany and Russia, and Soviet Russia. But there was something called the Treaty of Rapallo of 1922, which was a unification, or an attempt, I should say, to cooperate between Germany and Russia, which was never fully implemented because of the assassination of its architect, Walter Rathenau, several months after the treaty was signed. Now, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, there was renewed concern that a unified Germany would orient toward Russia rather than toward the West. And so this is the context for the destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines, with the Biden administration acting on behalf of British geopolitical interests. And that's the significance of Hersh's latest paper, which will be linked in the description section below, which describes Germany as the target for the Nord Stream pipeline being blown up, not Russia. And it also explains why Schultz has had no response, that the German parliament has not investigated, there's no demand for an investigation, and meanwhile Germany is heading into a recession and an accelerated process of deindustrialization with no response. Well, that changed at the end of August, on August 28th, with a peace proposal issued by 4 prominent German experts that wasn't about the North Sea pipeline, but was titled Ending the War with a Negotiated Peace. That is, German officials, very prominent individuals, calling for an end to the war in Ukraine and a negotiated settlement, which goes against Schultz's commitment to continue the war, to continue arming Ukraine, to be part of NATO's proxy war against Russia, which, as we reported yesterday, is no longer a proxy war, as it's increasingly a war of directly NATO involved against Russia. So the statement from the experts is completely timely. And I'll have a press release on it also linked in the description section below. The German experts include Dr. Peter Brandt, who's the son of former Chancellor Willy Brandt and a prominent historian, Dr. Horst Teltschik, who was a leading advisor to Helmut Kohl, the chancellor at the time of the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Dr. Hayo Funke, and retired General Harold Kuyat, who was a top German military official in various positions with NATO. Now, the timeliness of this couldn't be more significant. It comes precisely as what noted Russian expert Gilbert Doctorow calls Plan B of NATO, with Plan A having been the arming of Ukraine, the attempt to use Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia. That's not going so well. Plan B is an escalation to force a confrontation over Crimea, which we've seen with the two missile attacks of last weekend against the Black Sea Fleet stationed and anchored at Sevastopol. So this statement is directed at the danger of an expanded war directly between NATO and Russia if this war is not ended. Reading and circulating these documents is crucial because it's essential that we break the headlong rush into a permanent war, which is the direction of the Biden administration through its allegiance to the outlook of British geopolitics. So I urge you to read them and circulate them and join our mobilization to end this war.